Well, welcome to the latest video. So it is miserable and wet outside, and I'm not complaining because we've had one of the best summers we've ever had. So despite the fact that it's been raining for 3 weeks nearly. And what we're going to do is set up the balance on a Waltham. So here's the balance that we're going to be looking at, and the purpose of the video is to set up the whole thing so that it's fully working. So this here is the star wheel, which goes in here. It's a part of the regulator. It's had a pin soldered. It should be a friction fit pin, and it's got silver solder on the back and a lot of rust. And on the other side, it's got a missing axle. So there we go. That's the axle there that should be sticking up. And it's also got some file marks across it from when somebody tried to put this in, along with this here, which has a brass roller jewel which needs taking off and another one putting on. Or maybe we'll just replace the whole roller table. It just depends what I've got in stock. Okay, so according to this, we have 0.38 mil, which is not quite 0.4. Okay, so the technique I'm going to use to extract this is essentially to put the star wheel over a hole. I would really like a slightly smaller hole than that, but that's all I can find at the moment, so if I do what I do. It is a piece of steel, so as long as we're pretty gentle it shouldn't do too much damage. So then we're going to put a punch on it, which is going to get in the way of the camera a little bit, and then give it a gentle tap. You can see it there, somebody tried to rivet it from the top, so that's why I put it out in that direction. So I can confirm that piece measures 0.36mm. So what you're seeing there, that soft material just there, that is pretty much electrical solder. That's what it is. So here's an example from another watch. So in order for that to work, that shaft there must be smooth, because it's got to rotate smoothly in the bottom notch there and then roll the other piece back and forth, relying purely on friction, I would guess. So I might see if I can just get some measurements off that. So firstly, if we look at the other one, we can see there that the bottom of the hole is blank, whereas if you look at ours on this one that we're repairing, it looks like the previous owner has actually drilled a hole in the bottom of the cup. So that one measures 0.46. So you can see the base on this one doesn't seem to have a point. So in fact, on further looking, that does look original. This item is not held in place by the cup that's below it. It's actually held in place by the notch, which is sitting on the spring. So here's a quick illustration of the notch just there. Look. So sanity checking. What we've got here is a 0.3 drill bit. That fits in and picks up the hole. So we know that this has got a centre of 0.46, and we know that that's 0.3mm thick, and that's a ½ mil thick. So that means we need a shaft that's 0.8mm, and hopefully with a riveted end on it, which I would guess is to help it stay straight when you apply it. So now I've got to find something that will work for that. And I do have some spring wire, but I don't have riveted ends on. That measures 0.4, and that is too slack. So I found this wire in my stash, which is 0.43. It's been labelled and everything. This is not quite as wide as the original, but you know what you got, folks. So I don't have a piece of wire with, and I don't fancy doing that to the end of it because it won't come out straight. So I think what I'm going to do is tape at one end of it and then cut it to a short piece. Okay, so that's us on the pliers. Let's take a bit of Rodico on top just so it doesn't go flying across the room. So that's our little piece in the pin vise. These watch videos are really hard to show you exactly what's going on, so what I'm going to do now is use quite a fine grade grindstone to get the end of it as nice and flat and finished as possible. You see, that takes it off pretty fast. You don't really need a huge finish on the back side, but the other side we need to remove all those slide marks. So you can see there's still a little bit left there, so it looks like some of the scratches are quite deep and they may not come out completely. I don't want to take a lot of thickness off this piece, so I'm going to proceed to slightly finer grades now. You can just hear from the sound that that's a different grade, can't you? Okay, once you've got your part suitably smooth to where you want it, to really finish it off to a nice shine, you can use a thing called a polishing frog, or you can just use your finger on a flat surface with some emery cloth, and the final emery cloth finish is 3K, 7K and 10K. So this is quite tricky to do on camera, and especially considering that I've never done it before. So no, that's not working. So using an old micrometer just to push the pin into the star, because if you get the pin too long it tends to bend over, and so it's tricky, but it should be a good friction fit and be pretty tight once it's in there. And then you can check it with a 0.8mm drill bit, because it's 0.8 we're headed for. And that does go in. That does go in, so that's fine. So that's our finished push. The other side, which is not as well finished, is like that. And that is quite a tricky thing to do. So you basically put the pin into a pin vise and put the end of it onto the grindstone just to taper it a little so you can get it in the hole, and then insert it into the hole, and then you measure about 1/3 of a mil above where you want to be, because you don't want the little pin to be too long, otherwise it'll just bend. And then you force it in there. It's probably best, strangely enough, it's probably best to use spring steel to do it, because even though it's harder, it doesn't deform quite as much. The original Waltham part, as we kind of showed earlier on, has like a riveted head on it which keeps it straight. Of course I can't really do that, so micro epoxy from China. I used a little bit the other day, and it seems okay. Seems quite like they've done quite a good job on it. So I need to be careful about the footprint of the micro, because there's only a certain sized footprint hole on the actual balance cock. So leave that to dry now. I think it's got 40 minutes or something like that. So next, deal with this roller table. Okay, so the first job on this wheel is to remove the collet. So what you do first is you just check where the spring connects with the collet, and then when you pull the collet off, you avoid that area with the screwdriver. If you catch the spring end with a screwdriver, it can bend it, and then it alters its shape, and it's really tricky to get it back again. And you can see a bit more detail now of the brass roller jewel. Okay, so this is the roller jewel removal tool. So normally, if you're trying to avoid cracking the jewel, you put the jewel into that notch just there, and then you get a punch and punch it off. You can use about a 0.4. I normally use a 0.3. So if you are in America, I guess that's 0.3 millimeters. You may not use millimeters in America. There you go. So for those of you who are not familiar with watchmaking, it's a hollow punch that you use. Okay, so we've got a candidate just here. It's not as shiny as the one I took off, which is a shame, but the jewel is stable. It doesn't need re-gluing or anything like that. It's always worth just going through them quickly. Just make sure that all the grot is off them. If you try to push the jewel table up against the balance wheel and there's lots of stuff in here, or even on the balance wheel itself, it causes a problem. So you should always make sure that it's nice and clear. Usually they're shellacked on, and this one I've just checked it is not moving about, so it should be fine. So there's the other one. Just have the quick measurement and make sure they're both the same size, and then we need to make sure this one fits into the forks, because they are supposed to be interchangeable, but not necessarily. Okay, so before you put on any roller table, you should give it a quick check and put it on there and push it down, and if you can get it down to within about the just maybe a bit less than the thickness of the table itself, because it's a friction fit, then you're probably going to be okay. But if it doesn't go down very far, it's not a good idea to try and force it on, because these roller tables are made of quite hard steel and they'll just crack. So this is an opportunity to clean up the rest of the wheel while you've got the spring off and the table off, and get the pivots clean and everything like that. So on the 1883, this shaft here is about 0.6. It varies a little bit. I generally use a 1mm punch to put that one down onto the watch. I'm also trying to keep my fingers out of the shot, which is really difficult, I tell you now. Right, so that's our roller table on. Okay, so this is quite hard to show on camera, but essentially if you get a very, very fine polishing burr like this, as if I can hold it on my finger. If you get a very, very fine polishing burr like this, and polish the edge of the roller table so that it's nice and bright and shiny. You don't want to use a coarse one, because you want to have this as absolutely smooth as possible. So the next job is the jewel check. So I want to check that this jewel is going to sit on that pivot okay. And you might think that's stupid, well, because it will. Well, not necessarily. You can get a lot of watches that come in from places like eBay, and they don't necessarily have the right jewels in, I can tell you now. Okay, so here is a little diagram. So if you look at the top, when you put the jewel on to the bottom of the balance wheel or the top of the balance wheel, depending which one you're checking, you should see that pivot poking through above the level of the top of the jewel. Okay, so there's a cross section just there. You can see it comes back up. So because of the end shake in the system, when you put the cap jewel onto this flat surface here, that tip of that pivot there will just sit on the cap jewel. It won't poke through like that, it'll sit right on the cap jewel. But you need to have enough of that poking through that it can do that. Otherwise your pivot won't run properly. That's how cap pivots actually work. They work slightly differently to the normal pivots you see on the main part of the watch. That's the top one. That looks okay. Alright, so putting the jewels back. So firstly, the jewel rim that's inside there has to be flat. If it isn't flat, it won't sit flat. If it doesn't sit flat, it will be the wrong distance for the correct end shake, and the awkwardness of it being at an angle may cause a problem also. In addition to that, when you push the jewel in, it's got to be tight. It cannot be moving around. It's always a good idea to check whether it actually fits in the circular hole. But it does actually fit. If you look at it, you can get it to fit, but it's quite a tight fit. So that's your kind of check that it's actually going to fit in the hole properly. And then when you go through the other side, you have to make sure it's seated properly before you check whether it's loose or not. Obviously, if the jewel moves about, you will never be able to regulate the watch properly. It just won't work because it'll just muck about. So this is the half round punch that we had earlier on in the video, and it allows you to push the rim without pushing the actual jewel itself. So you need to make sure, look at the other side and make sure the jewel is straight, so you can kind of see that it isn't there. Still got a little way to go yet. Right, so there we are, nice and flat. So this is the one that had the rather chunky cap jewel. I don't know why that's so thick. Anyway, the cap jewel needs to go all the way down, and likewise the cap jewel cannot be loose, because if it's loose it takes away energy from the balance oscillator, and it'll cause a problem with the watch running. So you've got to make sure that's tight, and the screws need to go in properly. So the original screws, they're a bit rotty looking, they're not brilliant. So I do have some sort of nicer looking ones, so I'm going to use those instead. Okay, so just trying to keep my fingers out of the shot here, and this is very difficult to do. And if you just give it a quick check to make sure it's not rattling about, and you've got your top jewel in there. So now to the bottom jewel. Okay, so the bottom jewel goes onto the balance wheel jewel table, which is right at the bottom of the watch there, underneath the top plate. And this is the top plate that was a little bit on the grungy side earlier on. So I am going to replace the screws on this one, because the screws were a bit chewed up. So you can see how that's quite a nice tight fit, and it isn't going to rattle about. So you need to check the other side and make sure it's coming through properly flat, which it kind of is. So I'll have to just focus that for you. There you go, see that? It's coming through flat, okay. So then we have a cap jewel. So those screws are sitting a bit low, and if they are stripped out, then there's an option to put a slightly longer one in, which I do have some of. So the one on the left there looks okay. So you go back till it clicks and then down, and that's just to avoid, so that you pick up the thread and it avoids it getting stripped out. So that one is stripped out. So the first line of defence is to get a longer one. Now the longer ones are actually, these are the chock screws, these ones here, and they're a little bit longer and they're the same thread. Clicks and then forwards, and that is still stripped out. And you need to check that it doesn't come out the other side too much, otherwise it will foul the roller table. So that is also stripped out, so we're going to need to do something else. Okay, so we got that in. Quick bit of punch in there. Right, so we'll quickly put the top on now. So the first check that you want to do then is, firstly just spin it and then push down here and make sure it doesn't stop. that would tell you that your end shake was practically zero and you would need to do something about it. So put the screw in, and then we've still got a good spinning wheel there. That's just good. So the next thing to do is to check your end shake. You can just see that moving there. That means you've got end shake. You should also do a quick check at this stage to see if your wheel is spinning in a particular direction or if it's balanced. And this one does look balanced. So the next job now is to put the spring on in the right place. So if I take the wheel off and then mark off where the jewel is pointing to, it's got to point to between these two crosshairs just here, these two banking pins. And then once you've done that, you should be able to make a mark where the chock hole is, which is just here. I don't know if I need to focus that a bit more, but where the chock hole is, just there, coming from here to the edge of the wheel, and that tells you where you need to put the spring chock. Okay, so we have marked off. You can just see the black felt tip dot there. I know it's out of focus a bit, but and it goes in between, directly between these two banking pins by sighting down it and having a look. And then what we've got to do next is we've got to go from here to here to the edge of the wheel and mark that off, and that tells you where the spring chock's going to go. Okay, we're practically ready to put the spring back on now. So just do a quick check on these. This little stud here, if it's straight as a die, straight up, straight that way, generally speaking it will be fine when you put the spring on. If you notice that it's leaning slightly forwards or leaning slightly backwards, this is when you get problems with the spring starting to foul the spokes of the wheel, for example. So watch out for that. Right, so we've got a big mark there where the jewel is, which is just here, and then just where I've got the chock right now is where the other mark is, just here, and that's where we reckon this is supposed to sit. Keep getting my fingers in the way there, it's pretty annoying. Not too far. So when you've got it pretty much where you think it should be, you use a hand insertion pusher with a hollow centre just to put it on. Okay, so getting these on without the regulator pins, because we haven't got the regulator on at the moment, is a little bit easier, but still quite a tricky task, especially on camera. That's what you should see. You should see it shimmering like that. And you need to check it upside down also, so that you know the top jewel's been installed properly. So the next thing to check then is just that this is putting the jewel in the right place. Just here. It is possibly slightly off to that side. It's difficult to see on camera actually, but I will go off now and adjust that and try and get it perfect. Okay, so for the very last part of the video, we're just going to put on the last few parts, including the spring and the star wheel, which we repaired. There you go, that is on now. So I'm now going to move that out of the way to the max that I can. And then this here, this is the star wheel which we repaired. Got rid of the scratches and we put a new post in the middle of it, or an axle. And then this part here, this is the piece that goes on. So I hope this works. So I'm going to leave that loose until we've got the other screw in there. So we should be able to just gently tighten those down. And then we've got to pull this back and get it to sit on the wheel axle. So this was a bit tricky, I have to say, because you had to hold this down with your finger, and then we had to put a punch up against here, push the spring upwards, and then try and get the screw in with the other hand, which was extremely difficult. But I remember from the last time I did one of these that they are a bit tricky. Well, there you go, it's on, and hopefully that'll work. Yeah, that's working just fine. So this little center, this little notch here, this holds the axle in place where it's supposed to be, and it relies on friction and the tension of this. This is actually a spring in order for it to work. So that's how it works. So that repair is very successful. That's very good. It's doing alright. If you notice that the star wheel just protrudes a little bit over the edge there, so that you can get your thumb or finger on it. So that's that set up. So when you put your wheel onto here now, essentially you've got to take into account the regulator forks just there, which is just a little bit trickier. So that is it. That is the complete repaired regulator, along with the installed roller turbo. That's what it looks like, shimmering nicely and in good nick and ready for the rest of the watch, which is not the subject of this video. So folks, thanks very much for watching.